Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schopp, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably the world. Chief Influencer spotlights leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy environment. Social Driver teamed up with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and Communications Board to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Shawn Martin. Shawn serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer for the American Academy of Family Physicians, a medical specialty organization representing 130,000 family physicians and medical students nationwide. In this role, he provides strategic leadership to the AAFP and directs the mission-driven work of the nation's largest primary care organization. Here are 3 things I think you should know about Shawn. Number 1, he is recognized as a top expert in policy and advocacy. Before becoming CEO, he served as AAFP's Senior Vice President of Advocacy Practice Advancement and Policy. Number 2, Shawn has a proven track record of accomplishments in healthcare policy, and he's best known for his extensive work in national leadership on the development and implementation of primary care delivery and payment models and workforce issues. Number 3, Shawn's influence has been widely recognized by his peers. He was named to the 100 most influential people in healthcare by Modern Healthcare, and The Hill named him one of the top 10 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. So Shawn, you've been called many wonderful things in all of those recognitions, but today we get to call you Chief Influencer. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, I'm excited to dive in. And I thought one of the pretty cool things about your background is now, you lead the organization that represents all the family physicians, but you actually are the son of a family physician. Your dad was a family doctor in rural Oklahoma. So I wonder if you could talk about that background, how it's informed the work you do now, and what it's like to be in the role you are now with folks like your dad as part of the membership.
Yeah. It's kind of it was a weird thing. It was, very unintentional, but also very welcomed as I grew older. And, as you said, I grew up in rural Oklahoma, and my dad was, in his words, he would describe himself as a rural country doc, and but practiced family medicine in the northwest corner of Oklahoma, providing service to, a few surrounding counties. And it was an interesting time. And, and in those days, it was equal parts, this is what my dad does, and, equal parts annoyance, right? Because family medicine in rural Oklahoma is not an office affair. It happens at your house, it happens at your school. It happens at the Walmart. It's just kind of a community engagement. But as I went away and I really kind of started my career in healthcare, and, once I really got very interested in primary care, there were a lot of things that came, back to me, and observations and lessons. And I think one of the things that I've carried with me from, those days is the concept of service, and like really being in service to a population or a community or a group of people. And for his case, he was in service to a group of people that really had no other options. Like that was their access to healthcare, both physical, mental, and behavior. And that connection to the community, and like what it meant to him, what it meant to our family, but also like what it meant to, the people in those communities that he cared for. And, those lessons, grew from the annoyance of everybody's bothering my dad when we're trying to do something, to this really rich appreciation of kind of what healthcare really is or should be, which is this kind of longitudinal relationship between, a healer and a patient that is, focused on living their best life and being as healthy as they can in that particular moment. And it's special. Like everything in life, it becomes more special as we both grow older. But it was foundational to my work today.
I wonder if you could talk about what has changed for a family doctor. Obviously, when you were growing up and your everybody in the community was coming to your dad, there was no Dr. Google, which he didn't have to correct what people found on the internet. So can you talk about some of those changes? I mean, I'm sure they're positive and negative, but just wonder kind of the role of that of the family physician and how it's adapted and evolved.
Yeah, I think I don't know that the relationship between a family physician and their patients has really changed dramatically. I think what's changed is everybody else that's involved in that relationship. So, medicine, appropriately specialized over those years. You have more sophisticated and specialized physician services, which is a great thing. I mean, the concepts like cardiology and oncology, like those things are really helping people, address disease, but also live better life. But I think the biggest thing is just the ability of physicians to take care of people in a more comprehensive way than they ever could. And, a lot of that is driven, by technology, but a lot of that is just driven by the ability to treat a wider swath of diseases and conditions. And, as I say this to my members a lot and to the public, like I think it is, just incredible testament to science, that people live after the first onset of disease or chronic disease, because, it wasn't that long ago that people just died, and you didn't, there weren't very many chronic diseases because they didn't live. So the fact that we have the ability to help people live longer lives and healthier lives and manage chronic illness. But I mean, without question, technology has completely changed things. Just the concept of being able to be in a relationship with someone without them having to drive, to your clinic or you to them, is just a recognition of our economy, right? Not just in healthcare, but it's changed a lot of things.
I know in your role, I mean, you talk about the doctor-patient relationship now has so many more folks involved. That's probably true of healthcare in general. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved,
Yeah.
patient groups, policymakers, et cetera, et cetera. I wondered if you could talk about some of the different stakeholders that you have to manage and influence in your role as CEO, and some of the strategies that you've used to do that.
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. So, I mean, I kind of have, I work out from, kind of the inner circle. So obviously lead an organization and I'm obligated to, work with the board, and the opportunity, really the privilege to work with our board of directors and our staff from kind of the strategic and operational perspectives. We then move out of a circle and we have, our members, and, really just the honor to engage with them and represent them across a variety of issues and opportunities on behalf of their work and family medicine. We have state chapters. We have 54 chapters, both state and territory chapters, and engagement with them. And then we kind of move what I refer to as outside the building. And then my major stakeholders in my day-to-day work are really kind of the thought leaders, policymakers, and media. And then, of course, the broader healthcare community that we engage with: patients, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, other physician groups, other clinician types. I have always taken the approach in this role that, we will work with anybody that is interested in advancing the concepts of health and people being healthier. So we don't really, we don't use the word strange bedfellow much, because we, are so strategically focused on the advancement of health and well-being in individuals and populations that people want to work with us on that. We'll engage with them. But, I probably spend more of my time engaged in, the media and kind of thought leadership stakeholder space outside of our membership and board and state chapters.
When you're engaging with the media, when you're sort of, serving as the spokesperson and thought leader for the organization, what are some of the key messages that you want to get out? Because I would imagine, a lot of folks in the world, even policymakers, they just don't understand everything that goes into the healthcare system and to the day-to-day of a doctor. So I'm just curious, what are some of the things that you hope people will hear from you?
Yeah, I think, the first thing I hope they hear from us is a very consistent message around the value of family medicine. We spend a lot of time speaking to and about the value of a longitudinal relationship with a family physician. And I use this phrase all the time. We are committed to discipline around that message. We want everybody talking about that all the time, me included. But the other things is really, we spend a lot of time in our healthcare system on what I call the heroism end of the spectrum, and we don't spend a lot of time on the health or helping end of the spectrum. So I advance a lot of messages about the concept of health and longitudinal relationships with primary care as a means of fostering health and well-being over the course of the lifespan. And that doesn't mean that there's not a need. There's always a need for acute intervention based upon disease or collection of diseases at various points in life. But I think family medicine is really unique in the totality of care that it provides, both mental and physical and behavioral health, and the ability to really be a partner with the patient across their entire lifespan and being a partner in health. And I close a lot of speeches, with this simple concept of to kind of frame up what I mean by that. And a family physician is unique in the healthcare system because they also oftentimes are that person that holds a patient hand on the best and worst days of their life. They're there to celebrate like the best of things, and they oftentimes find themselves there in the most difficult of conversations. And that's the power of family medicine, and it's also the responsibility of family medicine.
Yeah. I think that what came through to me from that was kind of the why of what your organization does and what you're trying to get across. And when I think about sort of how you get that message out there, one of the things that I found really interesting was that in your previous role with the AAFP, you launched a blog called In the Trenches. And I wondered if you could talk about, I don't know exactly how long ago it was. I know it's been a little while, but just as a communication tactic, why did you decide to do that? And what was the reaction to doing that?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was on a whim, right? Like we had kind of come out of the Affordable Care Act. We were really trying, we had been extraordinarily successful as an organization from a strategic perspective during the Affordable Care Act and positioning our priorities. And, but there was kind of a need to maintain market posture, both with our members, but also with thought leaders. And I don't know that we had ever really had a kind of a thought leadership strategy at the organization. We had media strategies, we had membership strategies, but we had never really engaged in kind of this concept of thought leadership in the, kind of particularly the health policies space. And there were a lot of things we wanted to say. And we wanted to say them both prospectively, like speaking to and through our members with this key audience, but we also wanted to respond to other people, but we didn't want to do it directly, right? So we wanted this kind of thought leadership space to be able to say what we wanted to say, tell our message, be disciplined in that, but also to have a safe space to respond to things that we thought deserved a response in the public space. And so we launched the blog. It was an experiment like everything else in in association world. You launch it for a quarter to see how it goes, and then you do it another quarter, and eventually it just kind of took off. And it was a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed writing that because I could write about a lot of things, both from a policy perspective, but I could also write about some softer things of just kind of the trials and tribulations of trying to advance good public policy and what oftentimes are really hard environments, and sharing with our members and others about how we went about that and the joys and frustrations that come along with that ride.
When I think about that kind of piece of the strategy, a lot of associations were pretty slow to shift as the media landscape changed. We used to be able to just always reach people through a third party, right? You just got media coverage or you placed an op-ed. And then we began to develop our own platform and our own relationship so that you could have a blog that people could read directly from you. And you didn't have to hope that a newspaper would place that piece. And it seems like you all were fairly early on in terms of your market of doing that in that case. And then you also launched your patient-facing familydoctor.org brand so that, rather than just speaking to members, you could get trusted information out directly to patients who might be asking Dr. Google for help, and hopefully they'd find your doctor vetted information. And so maybe you can talk about that a little bit more because, the landscape is continuing to change, and in a little bit, we'll get to the newer tactics to get there directly. But a lot of organizations, they have a hard time doing that. And you said it was kind of on a whim, but obviously you got the the buy-in for to do it. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you asked forgiveness instead of permission. But love to hear more about it.
Yeah, there were a few blogs I wrote that I got you might want to tone that down a little bit, but very few times. I mean, so we've always been very disciplined in our communications approach at the Academy. I mean, it's obviously a large organization. We have a lot of resources and channels and very talented people here, but we really communicate in very rhythmic or kind of systemic ways. It starts every Monday. I communicate with our staff in a weekly communication. I communicate with our board every 3 weeks. We communicate with our chapters and others, in a short thing every week, but basically every month we communicate, with the broader world on a quarterly basis, through various different communication tactics, and we have a cascading, if you will, communication strategies. Our blogs plug into that, and of course we're going to get to it in a little bit, but how social media weaves in and out of that kind of cascading communication strategy. And again, I go back, a lot of that, this helps us maintain some discipline in messaging. So we're very consistent across communication vehicles, and we continuously push out a very consistent message to a variety of audiences across a variety of mediums. And I think that's been really important to our success because we don't have a lot of discrepancies in how we communicate around our priority issues. But from a broader sense, the philosophical approach that I took as an SVP, we've taken it as an organization, and I've accelerated as CEO, is I never wanted to be dependent on a third party to tell our story. So how do we create platforms and mechanisms to communicate the family medicine story that we want to tell to as many people as possible? So we wanted to talk about the value of family medicine to patients and the public, broadly speaking. So we have familydoctor.org to share that information to help them on their journey to health through that platform. We have our own website. We've created lots of social media channels to do that. We have an internal analytic and kind of think tank, and we communicate policy, research answers and questions through that. So somehow it all comes together. Some of it is a strategy, and some of it is we just have extraordinarily talented people that keep all of these things moving forward in a very consistent and disciplined way.
There's a few of those I want to dive into in a second. But before we get there, I did want to ask you, how do you deal with misinformation, and how much is that affecting family doctors and the healthcare space right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue for our members. And I mean, there was a new study that just came out this week, I think that JAMA published around, just how frightening the situation is right now around, this concept of truth and information, and who are good messengers of truth, and who do we believe and not believe, and kind of the confirmation bias that's really settled into our society as a whole. So, I mean, one, look, we view ourselves as a conveyor of truth around science and medical issues. We also are a contributor to that truth. I mean, we do research, we do practice guidelines, practice guidance. Like, we're both establishing and communicating this concept of truth in healthcare. I think one of the things that's really important, and I think, I worry about a lot in society generally speaking, is we have adopted a position that truth is forever. And, when you think about it in science, and science is the truth as we know it today, based upon the information that we have available today, or our best thinking or our best conclusions. Science is not definitive. It's constantly changing and being challenged and evaluated. So I think one of the really important roles we play and our members play is helping people think about and digest and comprehend, that concept that medical evidence and scientific evidence is really changing at all times. So, what we thought was the best approach to a particular disease a decade ago probably isn't necessarily the best approach today. The best pharmaceutical treatment for this 5 years ago may not be the best pharmaceutical treatment today, because the science has changed based upon our, kind of inquisitive nature to continually challenge the the accepted truth from a scientific perspective. But I think that's, being really misrepresented by some actors in the public space. And I think it's definitely being misconstrued by a lot of people. And that's creating a lot of problems for the healthcare system because truth is an individual definition.
When you think about how to persuade people, one of the things you and I talked about before is, sometimes you have to speak to the head and use logic, and
That's
then
right. We
sometimes
did
you have to
talk about
speak
that.
more to the heart.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more and how that, affects what you do in your role.
Yeah, I forgot we talked about that. That's a great. It's one of my favorite things because it's how I think about my communication strategy personally. So a lot of times I communicate through my head, right? And this is like very scientific based, evidence based, like very policy rigid communications, and it's just kind of a reflection on or a perception of or an opinion of an issue or some new set of facts or a new research study. And, I try to put that out in the public space with perspective around what does this mean to our members or what does it mean to our healthcare system. But I see a lot of value in communicating with people's hearts and, both for, motivation and fear and love and hope and all those different emotions. But, a lot of people are really moved by this concept of hope or fear or laughter or, those types of things. And I think it takes both. Like you just can't be dry, analytic communicator all the time. You have to connect with people across the, complexities of their personalities. And I think it's just really important for leaders today to do that in the most appropriate way for them and their organizations.
You talked a little bit earlier about consistency
Yeah.
and discipline, and I love the approach that you all have where, they know they're going to get that email on Monday internally and your board knows they're going to hear from you every 3 weeks, for example. I want to talk a little bit about social media. Okay, first, you're still on X. Why are you still? Because, we know a lot of people who've decided to move away from that platform. So let's start there. Why do you still use X, formerly Twitter, as a platform?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. I use X, or formerly known as Twitter, primarily for one reason, and that's because I think there's a lot of people in that space and on that platform that I want to communicate with, and I want our perspective to be out there. And I think if my perspective or our organization's perspective was not in that space, then that would be a disservice to those who are looking for information or guidance on that particular platform. And I think, at the present time, like irrespective of other challenges with that platform, it is still a space that a lot of people go. And I want our message and I want our perspective to always be present there. And that's why I do it personally. That's why we do it as an organization. And, let's be honest, it's still the easiest platform to use, right? Like you're limited by characters, so you can't be too wordy. It's a good platform from that perspective.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could talk, because look, a lot of leaders are not on these platforms personally, or if they are, it's like an official statement from the organization. Yeah. This appears to me, I think you've told me, you're doing this stuff yourself. You're posting directly onto the platform. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the decision to do that. You have time to do that. You weigh the risks. Is your team nervous that you have access to do this yourself, even though I'm sure they help you on some stuff? And maybe how you treat that platform versus others. How do you decide what's going to go on a post on X versus something on LinkedIn?
So going back to the head and heart. So Twitter is my heart communications and LinkedIn is my head communications. That's kind of how I divide it out. I have a lot of help with both. I mean, we have a lot of capabilities internally where our communication team, creates static content that we can plug and play into the various platforms. But Twitter is really 100% me. LinkedIn is a shared responsibility with our communications team. They prepare a lot of content for me to post there. But I mean, I would say greater than 50% of my LinkedIn content is original. I produce and find the studies and write the analysis and do those different types of things. But I try to be much more academic in nature on LinkedIn, and a much more, kind of um, engaging. And, I don't just tweet or X about, things related to my day job. I'll comment on, a small subset of, just kind of societal or pop culture type things over on that space, and go from there. But I do all the Twitter myself. I carve out time every day for social media. And I carve out about an hour on Sunday for my social media. I plan it through the week, and that's just kind of my, approach to that. But I do most of my social media planning on Sundays.
Mm. How do you manage this sort of gray area that all leaders have to manage nowadays between your personal brand and your professional brand? Because they're not as distinct as they once were, and
Yeah,
particularly on a platform like X, and you're sharing something, and yeah, maybe one of your members sees it and they say, I don't really like that, or maybe they say, yeah, I really like that, and I'm going to reshare it. And maybe it's not just an official statement about work. Like you said, sometimes it might go into a different zone. So how do you approach that? Do you have certain sort of rules of engagement that you sort of live by?
I don't have like a set of rules, and I will tell you in full disclosure, I'm a lot calmer. I've learned some hard lessons, and become a little more disciplined in my own right, with kind of what I do on particularly X. But, for the most part, I try to stay focused on, the organization I lead and the work I lead and kind of my area of expertise. I don't engage in political commentary beyond issues that we're actively working on. And the pop culture stuff is fun, right? Like, I mean, I comment on sports and, various things like that. I don't comment on, at a level of chastising or promoting or endorsing or things like that. Just kind of engage in some, public commentary and things like that. But, it's tricky. I think the biggest thing I try to always do is like, it's got to be my authentic self. And like people that know me would know, oh, it makes perfect sense that he would, say something about this particular thing, but not that thing, because that's just who he is. And, but, Anthony, I think the challenge is, I think leaders have to be relatable in, the modern era. I mean, in a social media era, I think people want to know, um, that you're not always scripted, and, you're kind of out there and you have opinions and you're willing to engage in this public discourse that's taking place. And of course, there's always a risk. And, I think that just kind of comes with it.
Social media is a particularly great tool when you are engaging around tentpole moments, or, certain events that other people might be sharing in. And, you do that in that kind of area that is more on the personal side that you mentioned, like around college football, for example, that,
Yeah.
that's a pretty safe area. I mean, obviously you might have,
Not always.
I was just gonna say, well, maybe, yeah, you have pretty strong fans on that, but hopefully people forgive you if you disagree with, if you're on the other side. But then you also do it around some moments that are in your industry,
Yeah.
um, like match day. And I wonder
Yeah.
if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think what you do around that is really cool and really unique. And it's something that I've heard, your members and folks in the community really appreciate too.
Yeah, I appreciate you raising this. So on match day, usually in March, I have a very intentional strategy. So I block out, almost the entire day, particularly afternoon, Eastern time, when the medical students get their match. And
Yeah, there you go. And I was just thinking, I'm saying match day without,
yeah,
telling,
well,
it's
match
when medical
day
students
is
get
the
their
day
match. It's a huge day for them. They put years
yeah,
and years into this.
medical students find out where they will do their residencies, and they find out kind of, I think it's around 11 or 12 p.m. Eastern time, and everybody finds out at the same time. So I kind of block the entire, midday and afternoon, and I sit in my office, and I just go through and with as many as I can, I engage them and congratulate them and welcome them to family medicine and the AAFP, and do just hours of engagement with the next generation of family physicians and our incoming new members. And it's wonderful. It's like such a joyous day, just celebrating them. Honestly, like there's no, like the whole day is just about celebrating them and literally being like, here we are, this big organization welcoming you, and like we see you and we're so happy for you. And I just spend hours doing that. And it is absolutely one of the best days of my year. I love it. And it, I don't know what it does for the medical students. I couldn't speak to that, but when you think about just days that bring you immense professional satisfaction, that is one of those days for me.
Yeah. I mean, to me, you talked earlier about, being disciplined, and it's just, the fact that you plan that out in advance, it'd be very easy to go, oh man, that happens I bet the meetings that day, I don't have time to do it as much. So you're intentional about it, which I think is pretty cool. And then I imagine, just from everything we hear and see about social media, those folks, when they're celebrating a big moment, love it when other people are part of that celebration with them. And at
Yeah.
that point, they may not have much of, if any, relationship with the AAFP yet, but they, hopefully probably will someday, because they may be student members already, or they may become members. So it seems like, a really nice thing to do that they would react to, but also not a bad thing to do as a way for, the association to connect with
Yeah.
them, and to do that in a personal way through you rather than just through the logo.
Yeah, it is. I mean, of course, there's strategic advantages to it, and but it is, it is just a wonderful, way for me to see them, and just be like, like we're so happy for you, and like we're gonna be here, like we're gonna have, a really long relationship, but like today we are just, giving you a virtual standing ovation,
Yeah.
and we're just really proud of you, and look forward to building a professional relationship with you over many decades.
I wonder if you could talk about your perspective as a leader on some of these kind of brand and communications things that we're talking about, that are not always easy to measure results from, but that you believe, are probably pretty effective. Obviously, there's certain things we can do where you can clicks, signups, member retention, all of that kind of stuff. Did the law pass? But a lot of things, you're building goodwill, and you're building brand in a way that is hopefully valuable, but it's much harder to measure. And sometimes there's pressure toward the things that can be measured really
Yeah.
easily, like overnight. So what approach do you bring to that as a leader?
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? Because we at the end of the day are, we balance obligations to members or stakeholders that, you're representing, and the realities of the budget, and the work that you have to do. And oftentimes, this work that's really difficult to measure, combats with, the need to spend resources in spaces that you can measure or have a more demonstrable impact on members. So for me, I'm a big relevancy person. Like I really want to be relevant in the moment. In my personal opinion, relevancy is measured by time. And if if you're not present and relevant in that moment, you missed an opportunity to be so. So we spend a lot of time just trying to be present, and being present around debates, being present in debates, being present in celebrating these special milestones and days. But I will always, even if it's sinking money from, a measurement perspective, I will always invest in being present and elevating our brand in key places in the public domain, both with our members and with the public. And I just think it's critical in a almost exclusively digital communication world. Like you just have to always be present, because if you're not, somebody else is. And I think that's the danger.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word relevance there, because it's not just showing up, right? Relevance really hits home that you're doing it in the right way, that people
Yeah.
see the value and why you're there. Can I ask you, so we were talking about how you show up on match day. I think a lot of times these days, I like to say faces are the new logos. We have to show up as our brand, but also we have to have people, leaders show up. You're on these platforms, you're doing this. Something that you all have done for a long time, but which I imagine has evolved as technology has evolved, is you get your members to be messengers for the association. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about what you've done historically, because you've been there a long time and seen it, and maybe has that changed over time now that social media is such an important communications channel?
Yeah, so we do a variety of things. So I mean, for many years before I came here, our board and elected leaders went through, a continuous media training apparatus while they served on the board. So, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, we did media training with them, and we still do that to this day. And it's intense media training. We do like murder boards and all kinds of things. Like they are very well trained to deal with interviews and media engagement. But a couple of years ago, we decided that we really wanted to elevate, I guess about 5 years ago, elevate the concept of family medicine in the public space around health. And we created what we call media ambassadors, which isn't very creative, but we brought in this cohort of family physicians, not on our board, not elected in any way, just people that we thought were really good spokespeople. They came from all geographies, very very diverse representation of family medicine, and we began to train them, and then we put them out to do interviews around a variety of health issues, it's just different types of things. And we've built this cohort, and we turn them over. There's about 14 a year, and we kind of turn them over about every 2 years. But the key goal of that program we just started realizing in the last couple of years. So we didn't want to create spokespeople for the AAFP. We wanted to create spokespeople for family medicine. And we wanted those spokespeople to develop their own media identities and media brands that would just kind of live on after they were engaged in this program. And we're really seeing a lot of positive returns on that. A lot of the early participants in that program, now are regularly featured on, a television station in their community or a radio station, or they have their own, podcast or, kind of YouTube presence around, various things related to health and the important role of family medicine and helping people with that. So we have just committed ourselves to kind of creating this population of spokespeople out there. And what we try to do is train them and empower them and give them a way to kind of launch through our media newsroom. The last thing we've done is we've democratized our social media content. So we, use a platform. We make that available to not only our media spokespeople on our board, but also our chapters. And we provide content. We let them use that. But the thing that we discovered is just the amplification of a consistent message, which you probably get. It's very important to me after this conversation.
Yeah.
The amplification of a consistent message around family medicine has really been remarkable to watch. And I think it's been, a real contributor to a lot of our success in the last couple of years. We are always present in a very consistent way.
When I hear you didn't use this exact word, but when I hear you talk about those ambassadors, those spokespeople, it sounds like in a time when everybody's saying, oh, what about the influencers? How do I get influencers to talk about me? You've created a program where you're cultivating influencers yourself for family medicine. Is that safe to say?
That's right. Yeah, we're training them, and we call it a training, using, and launching type of strategy. So we train them, then we use them for our own benefit. We organize their work on our behalf, through our media newsroom strategies, and then we launch them on their own and hope that they maintain engagement and presence in their whatever local means to them. That they have created enough of a stickiness with media outlets and influencers, other influencers, that they continue to advance the message of family medicine.
I imagine that leaders from companies, other associations, different industries might hear this example and be thinking, could we do that? Should we do that? And I guess the question that I would ask you is, what advice would you have for a leader who is thinking about, wow, maybe we can figure out some of our own people, whoever those are, and sort of try to model this behavior? What do you wish maybe you had known that you know now as you've started that and built on the success of it? Or what do you think another leader should know before they think about that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is it's a commitment, and it's not a one-time thing. Like, you have to commit to a very extended period of time to really start to see benefits from the program. And it's labor intensive, but Um, I, I, I am convinced that it's effective, and I think it's really helped us with our brand elevation and kind of promotion of family medicine in the public space. And I think it's positioned us as, kind of that conveyor of truth and, a source for information around health and well-being in a variety of circles. I think the one thing that I would encourage everybody to mimic that we did is these are not consistent spokespeople. You have to turn them over. We didn't seek to establish 10 spokespeople for the next 20 years. We sought to train 10 people over a 1 or 2 year time period and then train 10 more and 10
Yeah.
more and kind of using, a growth or amplification. A lily pad strategy is kind of what we originally called it to, get people out there. And I think the other thing is we don't attempt to, the hardest part that I think my fellow CEOs would have is we do not use this group of people to advance the AAFP. This group of people are designed to speak to the value of family medicine to a variety of health and wellness types of issues. They are not there to advance or promote or evangelize about the AAFP. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is about the discipline of family medicine. And I think, it's tempting for CEOs and boards to be like, if I'm going to spend all this money, I want you talking about my organization every day. And we have fought that, like just fought back against that approach. And that's, I think it's been very helpful, but, it takes some courage, and it takes a couple of hard conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, right? Is if it's totally self-interested, I just have a feeling that, it probably wouldn't be as successful of a program as it is, right? But
Yeah.
finding that area of mutual benefit where it's lifting everyone up by talking about family medicine in your case, it's probably more sustainable, more strategic, even though it could be tempting to say, talk about our conference or whatever, the big issue is that's going on. Maybe they'll just do it naturally in the right way. And then the other thing that strikes me is with the rise of influencers and all of these online experts, it's very tempting for local media to just turn to whoever says they're an expert. And, you and your members may cringe to see some of these so-called experts that they're putting up there to give advice. So by you creating a stable of these folks and continuing to renew it, you're putting more options out into the wild to hopefully let the media turn to qualified experts who, are part of your community. And that's a good thing for everybody because, we don't always know if the person who's on TV is a really great expert or not, but, somebody thought that they were good enough to give the spot to. And anything we can do to get more of the right people out there, that's just better for society as a whole.
Absolutely. And we've like, it's been, we've had some, former spokespeople that, they're on TV every week, right? They're, like they have just really flourished as an individual contributor in their communities and regions, and others didn't take hold. So it's not 100% success rate, but we've had enough success that we continue the program. Like we think it's really helping us.
Yeah. Last thing I just want to ask is obviously, the medical world very well, and you've been at the AAFP for a long time. Where do you find inspiration outside of the sort of usual places in your day job for influence?
I read a lot. I read obsessively. Which sounds kind of weird because I think it's very cliche is to say that, but I read a lot of things on LinkedIn. Fellow CEOs in a variety of industries. Read a lot of books. Right now, I'm a huge Adam Grant fan. He's speaking to me in a very unique way at this particular moment in my professional journey. I went through a cycle over the winter, Anthony, I was just obsessed with Kobe Bryant and kind of his approach to, work ethic and discipline and just kind of this singular motivation around winning and success and, things like that. But it comes from everywhere, to be honest with you. I just kind of pull information and try to think about how that applies to how I could do my job better or be a better leader or apply that to my organization. But I also just talk to a lot of people and I think one of the, unique things that, was instilled in me very young age was just the concept of listening. And I just actually just enjoy listening to people talk about how they go about their jobs. And then you kind of take that and you shake it and like that doesn't apply, this applies. That's interesting, but in a different way. Yeah, it's really, fascinating what JP Morgan is doing around this concept of like professional development. Like, what does that mean to me and, my employees and things like that. So it's a combination of things. I enjoy conversations like this. Like I learn a lot from you and like listening to you on your podcast, talk about how other people are doing things. And it's just consumption of information and then trying to figure out how to apply it.
Well, thank you for saying that. We certainly have more options for that than ever before. I agree with you on LinkedIn. It's a great way to just get snippets from different leaders. And obviously LinkedIn's one of the places that folks can look for you and to hear from you what the Academy's doing. But even Snoop Dogg is on LinkedIn now, Shawn. So, we can find inspiration from a lot of different leaders on that platform in a way we couldn't before.
That's right.
Well, look, I really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing a little bit about what's going on inside the AAFP and your journey there. I think we got some really good messages from you that all leaders can learn from, but especially I think what you shared around consistency and discipline and predictability around communication. I think that's so critical for right now, especially because when it's so noisy, that consistency can actually be one of the tools to break through. So a lot of great gems, but that's one that I think I'll go back to in the future. And I really appreciate you making time to share that with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.